Hi and hello again. Today we are talking about the Z5, the Nikon Z5, but not just the Nikon Z5. I'm talking more generally about mirrorless cameras. That's one thing I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about the low light performance of the Z5 compared to the D780. Following on from a Christmas party shoot I did 2 weeks ago. I'll talk about that more in a second. And about how to use any mirrorless camera, particularly the Nikon Z series, in a way that will, I think, maybe help you get better photos. Hang on in there, and like every other one on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, and you'll get to see my other videos and some new videos coming in the new year. A little bit of background as we're now at the end of 2021. I've got the Z5 in, I think it was probably March of this year, and have used it at, I think it's 34 weddings I've done this year, in conjunction with the 780. And in that time I have done 37,603 photos, 21,000 odd with the D780, and 14,500 with the Z5. So I'm in a privileged position of having done quite a lot of practice with this thing and got to know it quite well, and I have changed the way I've used it over those months, over the weddings. I've changed my lenses, and what I have now, and I've had for probably the last 4 or 5 months and the last 12 or 15 weddings, is my lenses that I'm using for 2022 as well. I've also got the camera set up in a way that works for me as a wedding photographer, works brilliantly, but will also, I think, have some implications for you, because taking better photos, a big part of that, and I'm talking from personal experience, a big part of that is being able to get to a point where the camera is not standing between you and a good photo. So many people, I think, from I won't bore you with all the details, but I've got to see how a lot of other photographers work over the last 6 months or so, and their comments and queries and all that kind of stuff. And I do feel that there are very few people, very few photographers, very few of you guys, who are able to pick a camera up and not have to think about the camera, where you can focus 100% on the photo, what you're doing, how you're doing it, what's going to work best. There's almost always something on the camera that you end up thinking about, and anything you think about on the camera takes away from thinking about the image that you're wanting to create. So we're going to deal with that shortly, but let me first mention a video that I've been working on for about a week now, and I've almost given up with it. I will finish it after Christmas. It was a kind of behind the scenes video of a Christmas party. This was a Christmas party for Catapult Gene Therapy in Cambridge. They're one of the companies that actually make the COVID vaccine, and it was their Christmas party. Typical Christmas party, late in the evening, in the winter, completely dark, a very dark venue. The only light I had was from the bar and from the disco. A few house lights, but basically really pretty dark. To the point that when I was using the D780 through the optical viewfinder, I almost couldn't see what I was photographing. Focusing was almost impossible, because if you know Nikon DSLRs, you'll know that the focus point, apart from I think the D850, is not illuminated until you press the focus button. Then it illuminates and you can see what you're focusing on. The rest of the time it's black. Now, of course, if you press the back button focus and it illuminates and it's not on the right subject, you've then got to move the thing around. Anyway, it gets painful. And using the D780 at this party was actually a bit of a pain. The Z5, of course, with the electronic viewfinder, you get to see things you can actually see. it's at what the camera thinks is the correct exposure. Now, in many cases on that particular event, it was too bright. I wanted it to be dark. I wanted it to look like a dark Christmas party, which is what it was. I didn't want it to look like daylight. But focusing on this was interesting because it was actually as good as the D780. Now, I've seen loads of videos, many comments to my videos where people are saying the low light performance, and by that I'm assuming they mean autofocus, isn't very good on the Z5. It is. It's as good as the D780. In real terms, if you set up a laboratory experiment and you test them side by side, well, maybe. In real life, they are equally as good, to the point that when I took 770 photos, I think, at this party, I gave the client 198, and interestingly enough, 120 of that 198 were taken with the Z5. So I'll be finishing that video off after Christmas, but just to say, low light performance on this guy is phenomenal. It's perfectly okay to use as a professional camera in a very challenging situation. That's that over with. Now, today's video is really talking more about using a mirrorless camera, as I say, without having to think about what you're doing, how I've got this set up so that I'm able to do that, and maybe it'll help you as well. Not just with Nikon. I had Sony's A7 III for 2 years, and most mirrorless cameras are quite similar in the way you can set them up. I also want to mention Leica. Leica cameras have been my dream to have for many years, particularly the Leica M10. I love the thought of a completely simple camera going back sort of 30 odd years, back to the film days, and having a camera where I really didn't have much to change. I changed the speed, the aperture, and that was it. It was manual focus, and I took the shot. And I sometimes do miss something about the simplicity and kind of the honesty of those photos. So I want to show you and tell you why I think this, what's it come to? This one is about £2,500 worth of camera and lens is the equal of a Leica M10, £6,000 with a £6,000 lens on, £12,000. Why I think this is, now I'm thinking this is the equal of a Leica, and in some ways maybe even better. Let me explain before if you're a Leica owner, don't get too upset. Listen to what I've got to say. Right, Leica has been for decades the go-to camera for world-class photographers. Look back 20, 30, 40 years to the great photographers, and at some point, if not all the time, they will have used Leica cameras, and there's a reason. They're made for photographers. They're made by photographers for photographers, which, by the way, I think Nikon are as well, whereas I think Sony are not, but that's another story. Their cameras are absolutely perfect for travel cameras, for documentary cameras. They're just small, simple, reliable, and of course give great photos. But if we look a bit further, if we look a bit more under the bonnet, or the hood if you're American, what actually makes it such a desirable and such an expensive camera? And I think it's the simplicity, the reliability, the size, the weight, all those factors. And when we look at a Nikon mirrorless camera, I don't own a Leica as yet, maybe one day, but looking at the dimensions, this is very similar in size to a Leica M10. It's probably a bit thicker, certainly with the grip on, but the actual body itself is probably very similar to an M10. So it's not a vast amount different. The difference is the lenses. Leica lenses, even their really fast 0.95 50mm lenses, are probably not as big as this 58 1.4 that I've got on here. Plus, of course, I've got the adapter as well. So size-wise, yes, it is smaller. It can, a Leica M10, you can pop into your pocket, providing it's a reasonable size. You couldn't do that with this. So size, they're not quite a match. Weight-wise, I would imagine they're very similar. Technically, very similar. 24 megapixel sensor, Leica, 24 megapixels. But this has got some advantages. The ISO range of the sensor on here goes up to, a lot of the shots from that party I was talking about were at 25,600 ISO. I believe the Leica M10 stops at 12,600, and I've heard people who own Leicas saying you don't really want to get much above 3,000 or 4,000 ISO. This at 25,000, providing you don't do too much post-production and try and lift the shadows and change the exposure too much, the noise is not a problem. And then we've got in-body stabilisation. The Leica hasn't got in-body stabilisation. I can shoot with this 58mm lens at easily 1/10 of a second with no problems whatsoever, should I want to. I don't imagine there's many photographers out there who could shoot a Leica at 1/10 of a second and get a reasonable shot. So this is better. So there's, technically wise, these cameras, mirrorless cameras, are every bit as good as a Leica. What is lacking is the simplicity. Let's come on to that. I have 3 settings, U1, U2, U3, obviously, and I'll run through them quite quickly. I'm not going to do an in-depth, this is how I set the camera up, and take 20 minutes to explain that, but I'll give you a brief overview. I have got some previous videos, which if you subscribe, you can scroll through them and find it, where I do explain how I've actually set each of these up. Basically, U1 is set up for manual. U1 turns this into, as close as I can get, to a rangefinder camera. A simple camera where I don't have to do anything. U1 is manual focus, it's manual mode, but with auto ISO. What this means is, when I get to take a shot, when I'm at a wedding, and I do use this setting a lot at weddings, and for things like family shoots, obviously portraits, boudoir, I use this probably more than the other 2 settings. I'll set the aperture first thing. The aperture is going to be the major contributor to what that photo looks like. How much depth of field have I got? What bokeh have I got in the background? How much blur have I got? So set the aperture. I then think about the speed, and all this takes less than a second, of course. So I can set the aperture on the front dial, speed set on the back dial. Is the subject moving? How bright is the day? Is it dark? Is it light? Roughly what sort of speed do I need? Doesn't have to be perfect. Am I going to be shooting in a really dark situation, so I want, and the people aren't moving, so I want a 30th of a second? Is it a bright sunny day when I can whack it up to 4,000th of a second? The auto ISO is set between a low of the low, which is basically 50, up to 25,600. So I apart from setting the aperture and the speed, I can then forget about exposure, and obviously that it doesn't take long to think about. We're then on to, I'm then ready to take a shot, and that's it. I haven't got anything else to think about. I'm then on to focusing. Now I've got the lens, obviously this is a Nikon lens with the manual and auto switch on the side of the lens, so that's on manual obviously, and what that does is it gives me various features to help me focus. I've got the front button, the top, the function 1 button set up to magnify, so I can quickly zoom in, check the focus, press it again, and it comes back to normal. And by switching to manual, it turns on the focus peaking. So I've now got a camera where I can manually focus, and these Nikon lenses are, they're maybe not as good as a Leica for manual focusing. I have a 50mm 1.2 AI lens, pure manual focus lens, which I suppose the focus ring is a little bit more creamy, I suppose you'd call it, than this. But on this lens, I have to say, by the way, if you hadn't gathered, the 58 1.4 is my favourite lens out of all the lenses I've got. It's a very nice feeling focus ring, and it's a very easy to focus with. So I can simply, that's focused on something just over there. It doesn't take long. And now if you're shooting at 1.4, of course you've got to be pretty accurate with the focus. So if I was actually shooting the thing that is just over here, then I may well zoom in, just recheck that focus again, zoom out and then take the shot. But I've also got the focus box. Now, although we're on manual focus, we've still come up with a focus box, which I can move using the joystick to wherever I want to. I normally just have it set in the centre. And if I put that box over what I'm focusing on, then when I've got focus, without zooming in, not only will I get the focus peaking, but I will also get that box turned from red to green when it's in focus at that on that box. So most of the time I don't need to do the magnification. It would only be if I was focusing, say, the rings at a wedding, or bottles of perfume, doing product shots, that kind of thing. Or if I was doing a portrait shoot, then I might want to put that over the subject's eye and absolutely nail the focus. So there's several aids to focusing which are probably going to make life easier to focus using this than a Leica rangefinder. And you're probably thinking, yeah, but autofocus can do all of that. But autofocus gives you complications. What type of focusing? Are you going to use continuous or single shot? What focus area? Are you going to use one spot? Are you going to use a dynamic area? Do you want 3D tracking? You've got all these things, all these options that detract from thinking about what's in front of the lens. Manual focus is in many cases faster if you're in tricky situations than autofocus. Example, focusing on someone through glass. One of my favourite shots is of, say, the bride and groom on the other side of some glass, or a reflection in a mirror, or something like that. And that can very often fool the autofocus, and you can sit there for a long time trying to get the thing to focus not on the glass, but focus on this person, and it won't do it. Manual focus, you choose. It doesn't take any time whatsoever. There's no complication. Sometimes they'll be holding maybe a champagne glass, and I've got it on face detect. I'll talk about that in a second. And it'll focus on their face. And no, I don't want that. I want to focus on the champagne glass, not on their face. Sorry, let me try that again. I was interrupted with a phone call. I do apologise. I was talking about focus, wasn't I? So by using manual focus, you can bypass all that stuff and really focus, really concentrate on what you want to focus, on what you want to photograph. Now, of course, there are times when I do want face detect, when I do want some other form of autofocus. For anything moving, side to side isn't so much of a problem, even for manual focus. But obviously, the bride walking down the aisle, I need autofocus. So I have two versions of autofocus. If I go to U2, I've got wide area with face detect turned on, so it'll just pick up a face. Brilliant. I can hit the back button focus and it will track, no problems at all. Sometimes that is a problem because there may be the bride and her dad walking down the aisle, and sometimes, maybe if she's got a veil, it will only focus on her dad. I don't want that. I want it focused on her. In that case, I've got two choices. I can hit the function 2 button, which will bring up the center tracking box. I can just put that over her face, hit the back button focus, and that then will track her face. That's one solution. Or I can go to U3, which now gives me a dynamic 9 focus point, and I can move that wherever I want around the screen. Just keep that point over her face and track her as she walks up the aisle. So by having those settings, I can adapt instantly to whatever situation is in front of me. I don't have to think about the camera. I don't change anything else. It's always on. Those two settings are aperture priority, so I don't even have to think about the focus. I've just set the. I don't even have to think about the exposure. I'm sorry. Just set the aperture, and that's the only thing I really have to think about. And just going back to the manual focus, I forgot to mention something. So back to manual focus, you run, go to manual, and we're there. Aperture. Now, if we're shooting at 1.4, then manual focus is not difficult, but it needs to be accurate. On the other hand, quite often I'm shooting people after ceremony, just standing outside, standing in a bar, having a drink, saying hi to people, talking, chatting, and I'm just photographing those groups. I don't need 1.4 tiny sliver depth of field. I can easily go up to, let's say, 3.5, 4.5, something like that. Still reasonably fast, still reasonably shallow depth of field, but instead of being, you know, half an inch, we're now talking several inches, in which case autofocus becomes such a doddle. It really is almost as quick as autofocus. So that is how I'm using the Z5. And as I say, any mirrorless camera, certainly any Nikon mirrorless camera, you can set up identically. As I say, if you look back in the videos, you'll find out how I've actually set that up for the user functions. But also Sony, Canon, Fuji, they're all mirrorless, and they will all have very similar sort of features that you can use to get to something that is totally usable, that requires no thought in order to get the photo. And I hope you can put that into practice, and I hope that helps you get better photos. Thank you very much for watching. We're just before Christmas, so I wish you a happy Christmas, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I will be back with you after Christmas. Thanks for watching.